After the Battle of Morlenfurt Manor, the remnants of Captain Falkenheim's force, mud-stained, bloodied, and reduced to a shadow of its former strength, begin the long march to Castle Graunenburg. Within the shadowed courtyard of Castle Graunenburg, the broken remnants of Falkenheim's force are finally made whole. For the first time since Morlenfurt, the men stand in ordered ranks again. Captain Falkenheim walks the line, mud-caked armor, dented breastplate, cloak stiff with dried blood, but his voice carries, these are no longer survivors, they are a garrison. Beyond the walls, at the edge of the Reichwald forest, the tree line shifts, horn calls echo at dusk, fires begin to burn in the darkness. As dawn fails to break over the walls of Graunenburg, the truth emerges from the tree line. A seething mass of Skaven. Rusted armor glints in the half-light, ragged banners twitch above the swarm. The ground itself seems to move as the Verminous Horde surges forward. At their center, a creaking, ramshackle siege tower, pushed by sheer weight of bodies, ladders raised high, carried by expendable slaves. This is no probing attack, this is a full assault. Beneath a sky the color of old iron, the advance of the Skaven begins. A sharp crack splits the din of the battlefield, then another, then a third. Far behind the advancing tide of Skaven, 3 long-barreled Jezzails open fire. High above the gatehouse of Castle Graunenburg, the great cannon crew jerks violently as the war-pleaden rounds tear into them, killing 2 of them. A sickly green glow begins to pulse deep within the rear lines of the Skaven host. The warp lightning cannon arcs of emerald energy dance wildly along its barrel as the crew scream calculations at one another in their chittering tongue. The machine bucks and shudders like a living thing barely held together. Then the cannon fires and explodes harmlessly across the ancient ramparts. Falkenheim draws his sword and raises it high above the walls, then brings his blade down. Fire. Smoke rolled thick across the battlements of Castle Graunenburg as the defenders answered the advance of the Skaven with black powder and steel. The first unit of handgunners leveled their weapons toward the armored ranks of Stormvermin forcing the tower onward through the mud. A ragged volley erupted. But when the haze cleared, the Stormvermin still marched. Further along the battlements, a second handgunner company fired into the advancing clanrats on the Skaven flank. This time the shots found flesh. 2 ratmen spun into the mud, broken by lead shot. Atop the tower, the rocket battery unleashed its payload with a deafening roar. A storm of shrieking rockets spiraled wildly into the sky, only to veer off course entirely. Then came the thump of the mortar. The shell arced high above the battlefield before plunging directly into the clanrats on the flank. 3 more clanrats disappeared beneath the blast. For a moment it seemed the Empire guns might yet break the assault. Then disaster struck atop the gatehouse. With a violent crack and a shower of sparks, the great cannon bucked unnaturally sideways. Through the drifting smoke, the Skaven and their siege tower continued the slow, unstoppable advance toward Graunenburg's walls. The Jezzails took aim once more. 3 cracks split the air. Then the Jezzail round struck. 1 shot shattered against the cannon's iron frame. Another punched through a powder barrel stacked beside the gun. A deafening explosion tore across the battlements. The great cannon itself split apart under the force of the detonation. The last surviving crewman was thrown screaming from the parapet, disappearing into the smoke beyond the gatehouse. The walls of Castle Graunenburg shook beneath the endless advance of the Skaven Horde. Still, Captain Falkenheim's soldiers held their ground. Along the central wall, the first company of handgunners unleashed another disciplined volley into the advancing siege tower. Lead shot hammered into warped timber and scavenged iron plating with loud splintering cracks, but the monstrous structure continued forward untouched. On the eastern battlements, the second handgunner company fired into the clan rats sweeping along the flank below the walls. One ratman collapsed into the mud, clutching its chest. The mortar crew, grim-faced and blackened with soot, adjusted their aim and fired once more. The shell dropped neatly into the clan rats on the flank. Then the rocket battery answered, with a shriek like tortured metal. The first rocket screamed into the sky, trailing sparks and smoke before plunging directly into the upper platform of the siege tower. The explosion tore through the clustered Stormvermin atop the structure. 3 elite ratmen were hurled from the tower in burning pieces as splintered wood and green fire burst outward across the assault line. But the celebration lasted only seconds. The second rocket detonated inside the launcher itself with a violent cough of sparks and black smoke. The battery would not fire again until repairs could be made. With relentless determination, the Stormvermin heaved the siege tower onward through the mire before Castle Graunenburg. From atop the creaking platform, Skaven warriors screeched and hammered blades against shields in anticipation. Larger than the Stormvermin surrounding him, the Warlord loomed above the Verminous Horde. Behind them, another formation advanced in ordered ranks around a hooded figure crackling with green energy. A warlock engineer. Then came the rising whine of arcane machinery. The warp lightning cannon fired again. A lance of green lightning tore across the battlefield and slammed into the battlements with explosive force. One Empire swordsman vanished instantly in a burst of sparks and burning flesh. Moments later, the distant cracks of Jezzail rifles echoed once more. A spear-armed defender upon the wall jerked violently as a warp-tainted round punched through his chest plate. Captain Falkenheim reacted immediately. Handgunners fall back from the center wall, he ordered. State troops forward. Along the eastern flank, however, the second company of handgunners continued their disciplined volleys into the advancing clan rats below. This time the shot struck true. 3 ratmen fell screaming into the mud as lead shot tore through the tightly packed formation. Then came another disaster from the Reichland artillery line. The mortar crew, rushing to maintain the barrage under mounting pressure, ignited their next charge, only for the weapon to erupt in sparks and choking smoke with a horrible grinding crack. The barrel jammed violently off-center. With shrieking war cries, the clan rats on the eastern flank finally reached the walls of Castle Graunenburg. Ladders slammed against the stonework, hooks bit into the parapets, then the ratmen began to climb. At the center of the battlefield, the Stormvermin strained once more against the massive siege tower, pushing with snarling determination through churned mud and corpses. But the shattered ground before the walls slowed the engine to a grinding halt. From atop the tower, the Skaven Warlord roared in fury. Then came the hiss of alchemical death. A shell launched from a distant Poisoned Wind Mortar arced high over the battlefield before bursting amidst Falkenheim's spearmen. The globe shattered in a cloud of luminous green vapor. One spearman collapsed instantly, clawing at his throat as the toxic fumes consumed him from within. The Jezzails followed moments later. 3 sharp cracks echoed through the smoke. 2 more spearmen jerked violently as warp-tainted rounds punched through shield and breastplate alike. The walls of Graunenburg were thinning, but on the eastern flank the Skaven assault finally broke. Unable to overcome the defenders atop the ramparts, the remaining clanrats faltered under disciplined counterattacks from the embattled handgunners. 1 ratman was run through and hurled screaming back over the parapet onto the rocks below. The rest lost their nerve immediately. Screeching in panic, the surviving clanrats abandoned the ladders and fled from the walls. Upon the central battlements of Castle Graunenburg, Captain Falkenheim stood waiting. Below him, the massive siege tower loomed through smoke and drifting ash like some monstrous iron beast clawing its way toward the walls. Its wheels groaned beneath the weight of armored Stormvermin packed upon its platforms, while atop the structure the snarling Skaven Warlord paced with murderous anticipation. The tower was almost upon them now. Falkenheim turned to the men beside him. His swordsmen tightened their grip upon shield and blade as they formed ranks behind the parapets. No speeches were needed. Every man upon the wall understood what came next. When the tower bridge fell, the real battle would begin. Along the eastern battlements, the victorious handgunners sighted the fleeing clanrats scrambling away from the failed ladder assault below. Fire! A final disciplined volley rang out across the walls. 3 more clanrats collapsed into the mud as lead shot tore through the retreating formation. Then the rocket battery roared once more. The first rocket detonated catastrophically within the launcher frame itself, showering the crew with sparks and twisted fragments of metal. The second rocket screamed wildly off course, but the third rocket flew true. Trailing smoke and fire, it slammed directly into the upper deck of the siege tower amidst the tightly packed Stormvermin. The explosion tore through the formation with devastating force. 4 elites Skaven were blasted from the platform in shattered pieces. The celebration was short-lived. The rocket battery's firing rails were now twisted and smoking from the earlier malfunction. Crewmen scrambled frantically with tools and hammers, but the weapon would not fire again until repairs could be completed. From atop the siege tower, the Skaven Warlord lowered his halberd toward Falkenheim upon the battlements as though issuing a challenge across the battlefield itself. With a thunderous crash of timber and iron, the siege tower finally struck the walls of Castle Graunenburg. Then the assault bridge slammed down onto the battlements. The Warlord and Stormvermin charged. The clanrats on the eastern flank rally and reformed to face the battlements. Across the eastern wall, the hiss of another poisoned wind mortar shell drifted overhead before bursting amidst the defenders. A cloud of glowing green vapor engulfed the handgunner company. 2 men collapsed choking and screaming as the poison consumed them. Moments later, the Jezzails fired again. 1 surviving handgunner jerked backward violently as a warp shot punched through his chest. The warp lightning cannon shrieked as unstable energy surged wildly through its machinery. Instead of unleashing another bolt toward the castle, the infernal weapon fizzed in a shower of sparks. At the center wall, the true battle raged. Captain Falkenheim met the Skaven Warlord blade to blade atop the battlements as Stormvermin crashed against the Empire shield wall around them. The Warlord struck with terrifying speed. Its warpstone-forged halberd carved twice toward Falkenheim in flashes of green light, once across the captain's chest, once toward his throat. Yet both blows glanced from Falkenheim's battered plate armor in showers of sparks, the enchanted steel holding firm against the magical weapon. Nearby, a Stormvermin halberd punched through the side of an Empire swordsman, hurling the dying man against the wall stones as the Skaven pressed forward relentlessly. Falkenheim answered with a furious counterattack, his sword hammering toward the Warlord, but the Rat Lord twisted aside with unnatural agility, the blade slicing only empty air. A Around them, the swordsmen fought desperately against the heavily armored Stormvermin, yet their strikes failed to pierce rusted plate and heavy shields. The Skaven were gaining ground. Still, the line did not break. Shoulder to shoulder atop the blood-slick battlements, Falkenheim and his surviving swordsmen stood firm before the Verminous Horde. The walls of Graunenburg still held. The battered mortar crew, desperate to maintain pressure against the advancing Skaven horde, forced one final shell into the damaged weapon and lit the fuse. The mortar exploded instantly. A violent blast tore the artillery piece apart in a storm of twisted iron and burning powder. Yet even as the artillery line collapsed piece by piece, the defenders still fought on. Along the eastern wall, the surviving handgunners steadied themselves after the poison bombardment and fired upon the recently rallied clan rats below. One ratman spun backward into the mud as the shot struck home. At the center battlements, another volley rang out into the advancing clan rats surrounding the warlock engineer. Two Skaven collapsed beneath the gunfire, one tumbling screaming from the siege tower approach itself, while the other crumpled beside the crackling engineer. And atop the walls, the duel reached its terrible conclusion. The Skaven Warlord struck with savage fury, its warpstone halberd crashing repeatedly against Captain Falkenheim's failing guard. At last, one blow slipped through. The enchanted blade smashed into Falkenheim's side with brutal force, punching through weakened armor and sending the captain crashing heavily onto the blood-soaked stones of the battlements. Falkenheim tried to rise, failed, then dragged himself backward with one arm toward the nearby tower stairwell, leaving a dark trail of blood behind him. Too badly wounded to continue, the captain disappeared from the wall, still clutching his sword as the battle raged above. But the Empire line did not break. Falkenheim's swordsmen closed ranks immediately around the breach, shields locking as they met the advancing Stormvermin head-on. Once Skaven elite was finally dragged down beneath a storm of blades, hauled from the battlements screaming before vanishing over the edge into the darkness below. In return, the Stormvermin struck savagely, but this time the state troops held firm, turning aside halberd thrusts with shield and armor as they fought desperately to contain the breach. Though their captain had fallen, though their guns were failing, the soldiers of Graunenburg still stood fast upon the walls. The battle for Castle Graunenburg descended fully into slaughter. Across the eastern flank, rallied clanrats surged toward the walls once more, screeching as they climbed the ladders against the blood-stained stonework. The surviving handgunners met them with desperate resolve, firing point-blank down the ladders before drawing blades as the ratmen climbed into the smoke and chaos above. At the center of the walls, however, the Skaven bombardment intensified mercilessly. A shell from the Poisoned Wind Mortar burst amidst the defenders in a cloud of glowing emerald gas, for handgunners collapsed almost instantly. Before the smoke could even clear, the Jezzails fired again. 3 deafening cracks rang across the battlefield. 3 more handgunners were hurled backward in sprays of blood as warp-tainted rounds punched through breastplates and shattered stone alike. The center wall was rapidly becoming a killing ground. Then came the howl of unstable energy. The repaired warp lightning cannon discharged once more, unleashing a jagged spear of green lightning directly into the defenders holding the breach. 2 swordsmen vanished in the blast, their bodies hurled apart as arcs of warp energy leapt wildly across the parapets. Still the Stormvermin came, at their head, the towering Skaven Warlord carved through the Empire line with terrifying brutality. His halberd rose and fell in flashes of green fire. One swordsman was split across the chest and hurled from the battlements entirely. Another collapsed with his shield shattered and armor torn open beneath the enchanted blade. The Stormvermin followed immediately behind their master. Heavy halberds thrust over locked shields, and another Empire soldier was dragged screaming down beneath the Skaven advance. The defenders gave ground inch by bloody inch along the central wall. Yet on the eastern battlements, amidst smoke and climbing ladders, the Empire still resisted fiercely. One clan rat finally clawed its way over the parapet, only for a surviving handgunner to smash the creature backward with the butt of his handgun before driving a blade into its throat. The Skaven corpse toppled from the wall, crashing into the ladders and bodies below. The defenders roared defiantly despite the mounting carnage around them. Captain Falkenheim was gone from the wall. The artillery lay in ruins. The battlements were soaked with blood and poison, but still Graunenburg had not fallen. Amid the smoke-choked chaos upon the walls of Castle Graunenburg, the defenders fought on with grim determination. At the center battlements, the few remaining Empire gunners desperately attempted to halt the advance of the Stormvermin pouring across the siege tower bridge. The battered Hellstorm rocket battery crew hastily aligned their damaged launcher while nearby handgunners fired into the tightly packed Skaven elites advancing behind their warlord. The results were pitiful. The rockets screamed wildly into the smoke and exploded harmlessly amidst shattered stone and burning debris, failing to slow the armored ratmen, while handgun shots sparked uselessly from iron shields and rusted plate armor. The Stormvermin continued forward relentlessly. But on the eastern wall, the battle turned sharply in the Empire's favor. The surviving handgunners defending the flank had long since abandoned any hope of orderly volleys, fighting now with swords, daggers, and pistol grips amidst the ladders and corpses piled against the parapets. They met the climbing clan rats with desperate fury. One ratman clawed over the battlement edge, only to be cut down immediately in brutal close combat, a handgunner driving steel through its neck before kicking the body backward into the mass below. That final loss shattered the clan rat's nerve entirely. The remaining Skaven broke. Screeching in terror, they abandoned the ladders and fled from the walls in a panicked mob, trampling one another in desperate retreat as overseers screamed and lashed at them uselessly from behind. The Empire handgunners did not let them escape. With a roar of vengeance, the battered defenders surged from the battlements in pursuit, firing pistols and hacking down fleeing Skaven along the wall base and shattered ditch below. By the time the pursuit ended, nothing remained of the clan rat assault force but bodies scattered across the mud beneath the eastern wall. For the first time since the siege began, an entire section of Graunenburg's battlements had been secured. In the end, the Verminous Horde won the engagement in terms of casualties and battlefield momentum, but failed to capture the fortress outright. Graunenburg survives barely. The Empire garrison is shattered, exhausted, low on ammunition, and likely unable to survive another full assault without reinforcement. Meanwhile, the Skaven still control the field outside the walls, still possess the siege tower, still have their warlord alive, and can continue the siege. In the end, Reichland held, but only just. Battered, bloodied, and surrounded, the defenders of Graunenburg prepared for what would surely be the final battle.